People have this like understanding and they say, oh, fighting for Israel is in the IDF. I'm like, no, fighting for Israel is not just in the IDF. Yes, you could do it in the IDF, but fighting for Israel could be done in Twitter and in Instagram, and standing up to your professor on campus, and it's in a lot more things. The battle is not just wearing a uniform. Here, Herzel Hajjaj did not wear a uniform. Mirav Hajjaj does not wear a uniform. And they've done incredible things for Am Yisrael, 10 times more than I have done, and when I was in uniform in the army, 10 times more. So that's how that's where I start, and that's where I finish, I would say.
Welcome everybody to a very special Yom Hazikaron edition of the Eytan podcast. If you're listening to this on Sunday, tomorrow is Yom Hazikaron. And if you're listening to it after, hopefully this will give you chizuk for the future years of Yom Hazikaron. My guest today was the famous, legendary tour guide, Eytan Rund. If you went to yeshiva and seminary 15 years ago, or if you're a current student, you definitely know who he is. He goes with many programs to all different places in Eretz Yisrael and just really inspires everybody, including myself. We talked a lot about stories of soldiers today, a personal terrorist attack that Eytan was involved with himself, and just so much more. This was an awesome episode. I really hope you guys take some chizuk from it. And without further ado, it's time to listen to my episode with Eytan Rund. Welcome to the Israel Gap Year Be'in podcast. I'm your host, Avi Proctor, and in each episode, we get Be'in in depth into the remarkable lives of individuals in Israel who dedicate themselves to inspiring the next generation of Klal Yisrael. First of all, welcome, Eytan.
Thank you for
Eytan,
having
the
me.
famous Eytan Rund, as I like to say it. I personally know who you are, and you've had an impact, of course, on my year in Eretz Yisrael when I was in Chicago, and also my wife, Yali, as well. But for those that are listening, before we say about anything related to Yom Hazikaron and your life, who are you, and how did we get here today?
Okay, so my name's Eytan. I grew up in Jerusalem. I grew up in Katamon. Random Israeli kid, counting in Hebrew, dreaming in Hebrew, sleeping in Hebrew, and all my friends were Israeli. לא היה לי אף אחד חבר דיברתי אנגלית אולי עם איזה אחד בניסק שגדלתי איתו. And when I thought I always wanted to be either engineer, because I actually like this kind of stuff, or that I want to go and be a psychologist. I actually thought I wanted to be a therapist one day. And after the army, slightly, I started accompanying groups. In Tiulim in Israel, you have to have a medic or like a guard in every group. So a lot of people post-army, if they were combat, you didn't really learn any high-tech things, how to program computers or something. So I learned, I accompanied groups and to put it mildly, I was a little disappointed with what I saw. Meaning I saw a lot of teachers or tour guides or teachers or madrichot and, counselors for different groups, talking and the group not really listening. And for me as a bystander, it was very frustrating. I was like, oh my God, you're not in an impractical place. You're in Herzel, you're in Yad Vashem, you're in Masada, places which have a lot of potential to be very impactful. And I felt that it was like slipping, that it wasn't happening. And we say in Hebrew, it made me want a dafka, try to do the same thing. And I decided to do a guiding course for the Kotel tunnels. That was like 17 years ago. And I started guiding. In the beginning, it was like a side thing. I thought, okay, I'm going to do something else. And then I pretty much fell in love with it. And shortly after, I also got married. And I also started guiding more and more through different courses, different companies in Jerusalem, and eventually did the tour guiding course. Pretty much found a little... I don't know if it's called a niche, but in the yeshiva and some world, or in educational tourism. Meaning, I do a lot of groups of soldiers, a lot of groups of mechinot, Israeli pre-draft programs, and feel that my guiding is a little different because it's like if most tour guides and most teachers and rabbis who give tours, they're like a library, it's like they're a well of information and they have so much to give, but the experience that you're actually feeling when you're touring is a tour. And take an 18-year-old kid, put him in a library, he's not going to read even though he has 50 trillion books. He's gonna play on his phone, he's 18. So I try to make the actual guiding, the actual substance of what I want to say, more digestible. Sort of like, sorry, a leg of a cow has more meat on it, but a leg of a cow with flies will be less appealing to you if you're going to the hamburger place. Hamburger and chips and fries are probably yummier for your plate rather than more meat. Okay. So I try to make my guiding, doesn't matter how I do it, I try to make it more thrilling and more exciting. And I might translate poetry. I might tell personal stories. I might play over a music clip. I'll put like a clip of music that's very, emotional, and I'll talk over that, and like, oh my God, and make it more emotional. That's like where I aim. I strongly, strongly believe that if one day people are going to either make a move towards Eretz Yisrael, or for Israelis, if they're going to get drafted to meaningful places in the army or find meaningful things to do in their life, it's not going to be because of information they learned. It's going to be because of the way they feel. Sorry, Yali and Avi, I always say, to people, you're not gonna marry somebody that ChatGPT said he'll be a great husband. You're gonna marry somebody who you feel an emotional connection to. I can take a guy in a Mechina, an Israeli gap year program, and I can explain to him why Israel's a great place. If he's gonna one day serve in a meaningful place in the army, it's going to be because of the way he feels towards the Jewish people or Israel. It's not going to be because of information ChatGPT told him that Israel is a great country in comparison to Libya or, Argentina. He's going to do it because he feels a connection towards it. So we're emotional people. The bigger selections we're going to do in our life, the bigger moves we're going to do in our life, who you marry, what job you go in the army, what job you go into, as a career pursue. Like, a lot of these things are done by where you live. A lot of these things are like done because of the way you feel towards something. Like in a lot of these programs, I feel that's, it's very, if they want to learn a course about, this or that, Jerusalem wars, fine, they should go to university and take a course. But I try to make it more digestible and yummy for the palate.
Wow, and I totally hear what you're saying. And before we got on this podcast, when we were kind of speaking about the topic and the idea, which is, of course, Yom Hazikaron and making it meaningful and whatnot. Hopefully people are listening to this, by the way, the day we put it out, if not the next day, which is Yom Hazikaron next week. In your mind, from the tours that you give to these students and what you're trying to give over to them, specifically when it comes to Yom Hazikaron, we spoke about this, of course, off camera. What would you say is a perspective that we should be having? A lot of people say it's a day of mourning and whatnot, but how should we look at it, and how can we make it meaningful?
Okay. Obviously, Yom Hazikaron in the Israeli public, in the past few years, I feel more, became a day of mourning, and naturally so. It's a sad day. It's not a day. People go to cemeteries, to military cemeteries. A military cemetery is a sad place. Okay, you're going to go there and you're going to see a bereaved mom who's crying near the grave of her son, or a girl near the grave of her boyfriend or her brother. It's not a happy occurrence. It's not a happy experience. But I feel like the Israeli media and then the Israeli public, they got drifted in that direction towards looking at it as a sad day. Sad music on the radio in Israel about soldiers, different songs they wrote, or songs are written about them, different bereaved moms talking about their child. It just became a day of sadness and misery. And I personally, I don't like that. I think that it's a lot more a day of appreciation than a day of mourning. Okay, it's not. It's I once I was giving a tour in Herzel for a group, and I was near it was a group from an yeshiva called Neve Shmuel. It's an Israeli high school, and the rabbi there called up because one of their alumni from that group died, Moshe Berry. Now his right now the name's skipping my what do you call it? Sarah Berry, his wife, Also, her son and also her husband were killed. Okay, they're buried literally, I don't know, maybe 10 rows away from each other in her Herzel. So she lost her son and her husband, and he called her up, and it was like a week before Yom Hazikaron or something, and she said, "Listen, I have my day. It was either Kaf Bet or Kaf Gimel Nisan. It was mamash right after Pesach. That's my personal yard site. That's my personal Yom Hazikaron. That's when I, as a mother, mitichedet. I don't know the word in English. You know, it's a day I feel and identify. You know, and that's my yard site today. But I have Yom Hazikaron. That's a day. That's a collective day. That people, you know, all of Am Yisrael. And that's not my Yom HaZikaron. That's Am Yisrael's Yom HaZikaron. And I feel that she put it beautifully. Like, it's not a individual day. It's a collective day. Yom HaZikaron is our Yom HaZikaron. And it's really beautiful to see how in America, Memorial Day became a day of, okay, let's go, buy mattresses 20% off, cars with no tax, everyone's barbecuing, fireworks, and I don't. That's what Memorial Day became in America. When I tell this to Israelis, they can't even they can't comprehend. They're like, "What do you mean, Yom HaZikaron? That's like the saddest day in the calendar. It's like Tisha B'av on steroids in Israeli public. Like, you know, like people go out and barbecue on that day. I'm like, yeah, people, because in Israel, we feel a very, very strong sense of a people state, not a immigration state, and people feel like that was done for me. So Yom HaZikaron, more than anything, it's a day where we come and we appreciate. We see a bereaved mom in her Herzel, and we say, we appreciate your sacrifice. Because of your sacrifice, we today can live a normal life. I can go shopping. I can go study in university. I can go on a gap year and enjoy Israel. I can pick up my kids from kindergarten. That probably would not be the case if it wouldn't be for the sacrifice. If we, for one day, would say the price is so terrible, I'm not willing to pay it. There wouldn't be in Israel. Like, that's the day you can pack up your bags and move to London or move to New Jersey or move to I don't know, Berlin, because the milky, you know, the yogurts are cheaper there. We always laugh in Hebrew. That's the laugh. That's the joke that people make. I mean, it's true. Like, but the Israeli public are willing to pay that price, and we don't look at it lightly. Like, that's the sentiment that the Israeli media screams is like, oh, this is so tragic, and the subtext message you get is, this is terrible. This is not a price we as Israeli society are willing to pay. But that's not true. And if you ask me how I can prove to you that's not true, on the 8th of October, there were 140-something%, you know, drafting. And Tzuk Eytan and Protective Edge in 2014, there were 111%. Meaning random people came over your unit. We haven't seen you in 20 years of reserve duty. And these guys said, give me a gun. I'm going to Gaza. I'm going to protect the Jewish people. And
do you happen to have any more stories, by the way? Because I know your personal stories, you know, uniquely because you are, of course, a tour guide. But do you have, whether it's October 7th stories or from previous wars in Eretz Yisrael, of like, wow, that really speaks of who we are during times of what's going on?
Okay, so me personally, no, I had a very, very boring time in the Army, thank God. Baruch Hashem. By the way, most people in the Army, like, I know, like, you see, you know, movies, everything looks all, you know, like, okay, Army is a lot of training. 90% of soldiers in the Army don't carry a gun. They do desk jobs and office jobs and load bombs in airplanes and fuel airplanes and collect intelligence. You know, there's very little out there that is actually only 7% of the Army is combat, and that's all of artillery corps, infantry, tank corps, navy, everything altogether, 7%, 7.6. So 90-something% of the Army, but they're more important. You need somebody to fix a tank. If you don't gather intelligence, that pilot doesn't know where to drop a bomb. Okay, so I think it's unjust that they get all the credit and stuff a lot of times. So thank God when I was in the Army, things were very, very calm. But when I was in the Army 2003, 4, 5. When if I look at different stories from history, like from Israel's 75 years old, when I look at different stories, wow, there are plenty. I mean, there was a girl in 1948 that she was a lone soldier, a term that today's very popular, then was less. But a lot of people felt like, okay, we have to lend a hand. They called it machal then, mitnadvei chutzal. It's volunteers, foreign volunteers to the army, as well as, in the French army, you have French people. In the Italian army, you have Italian people. The Israeli army, you'll have people from all over the world. You'll have, you have a memorial near Beit Shemesh right here that is, it says on it, Bulgaria and Romania and Holland and the United States and South America and, South Africa, and people came from all over the world. There was a girl, her name was Esther Kallengold, and she came here in 1947 to teach English. She was a 21-year-old girl from London, so she's actually seen wars like firsthand. Like, it's not like she's seen it on Netflix. She's been a 17 or 15-year-old girl in London while Hitler was bombing it, and she's seen the war. When the war broke out in 1947, she was in the middle of teaching English. She didn't call up her mom and dad and say, "Get me out of here. Get me a plane, get me a flight, get me out. I don't want," She said, "I'm joining the Haganah." They didn't have an IDF yet. It was called the Haganah, the not Sahal. And a day before she died, she was wounded. And she writes to her parents a letter full of energy. She's today in her Herzel. But she writes to her parents, "If you receive this letter, I'm assuming it's going to be a little messy. I'm writing it to you to beg you, no matter what happens to me, please try to accept it in the spirit I would have wanted to. I have no regrets." She doesn't regret coming to Israel. She said, "We've had a fierce battle. We've experienced hell, Gehenna, but it was worthwhile because I'm convinced that one day we'll have a Jewish state. And our dreams will come true." Meaning she doesn't feel it as an individual. She's like, we'll have a Jewish state. I won't see it, but we will have a Jewish state. And if you understand that we feeling, then Yom Hazikaron makes sense. Then Har Herzel or 130 other military cemeteries make sense. Then you understand why on the 7th of October, random people came up there and left their Shabbos table or Chag table and drove down south and tried saving Jews, because it wasn't people they knew individually, but it was, we are being attacked.
When you say that about people were sitting at their Shabbos table, their Chag table, it was October 7th, Simchas Torah Shabbos. Like, I was here, right? But I can't help but think about all those people that were in America. I've heard different stories about, my different friends and family were in America. We were in shul and we heard this, and we had 2 more days of Chag and we couldn't get on our phone. But in your mind, right, when it comes to a day like Yom HaZikaron, when, of course, it's relevant for Jewish people all across the world, but it's really like impacting the day-to-day of the people that live here, right? Because you see soldiers, they're actively protecting you. But for the Jews that live outside of Eretz Israel that might be listening to this, that want to find a way to connect to Yom HaZikaron, that they might struggle with that a little bit, rightfully so, because, they don't necessarily feel what's going on here. What would you say to them in your mind?
Okay. First of all, okay, there are 1,000 good movies done about fallen soldiers. The most famous one is probably Michael Levine, but there are many, many, many more. So if you haven't gone, it's on YouTube and it's in English. It's 46 minutes long or 48 minutes long, except for 2 minutes twice that his personal commander Gilad is talking, and the interview is in Hebrew, and there's no subtitles on the YouTube version. The whole movie is in English. They just interview people in English. Very, very, very powerful, very, very emotional. But since that movie was done, there are many, many, many more, and many, many have subtitles. There are also many, many, many books. That girl I mentioned a second ago, Esther Kallengold, that was published by her brother in a book, like the letters she wrote to her parents. Super emotional, super exciting. There's 1,000. I mean, I read in Hebrew because I grew up in Hebrew, but half the books I've read, I'm sure, adjusting sites from Chaim Sabato. He was a soldier in Yom Kippur in a tank, in the 1973 war, in Yom Kippur. And I wasn't in the tank war, and I wasn't even born in the Yom Kippur war. So if you try reading a history book about these wars, you'll fall asleep. But if you read his story, it's about a soldier in Yom Kippur in a tank being shelled and bombed, and his best friend's dying right next to him, Dov Indig. And when you read a story told from a very personal point of a person, what he felt, it's very, very, very connecting. You suddenly pass by the same places in the Golan and the same memorials. They're not just a memorial, and they're a personal story. And the same goes to 1,000 other books and 1,000 other and 1,000 other like books and movies and clips and songs. There's a lot today, thank God, today with the internet. I mean, the internet does some bad things, but definitely good ones. This is definitely a positive thing. What I will say is that I wish inside. This is already getting philosophical, but I feel that we live in a world where there's a lot of connection to what people feel emotionally. Okay, you can get emotional from a good movie. Great. I don't know if that movie necessarily has a message to you that'll be like one that you'll take from now on. So I try, and also on my tours, and also I believe in this, meaning not just to connect to something emotionally, but also to ask, what am I doing with this emotion? I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about that more. I definitely think that there is a lot to be taken. Meaning, if people feel this emotional connection with Klal Yisrael, okay, I would love it if they wouldn't just, connect to Yom Hazikaron, but would also ask themselves, do I have a role in this idea and in fighting for Israel?
I actually want to touch on that point. For the broader Jewish people that are outside of Eretz Israel, and even those that are in Israel that might not be fighting in the army. You could even be an American yeshiva and seminary student that's here. When you talk about that fight for Klal Yisrael, what can somebody do essentially if they're not holding a gun? And as you said, 7.6% of the army are the people that hold a gun, and there are other people doing other things. But like, what could people like us? You're in Miluim to a certain extent, so we're not in the same bubble. But like, what could somebody who's not actually in the army do to fight for the Jewish people?
Okay, so years ago, during COVID, I actually wrote a book about this. Years ago, I actually wrote a book about this, and I've had a few podcasts. I'm not trying to make advertisement here, but in some podcasts, Tamir Dortal on this podcast interviewed Ben Shapiro, and he interviewed me. Okay, I have 400 followers on Instagram. He has 38 million. A little difference there. Right. And I got in 2 days on this podcast, I got more than Ben Shapiro got in 6 months. Okay, so I guess I tried articulating it in a good way, and it was something that people said, okay, we need to listen. And to make a long story short, in one sentence, I said, and this is right after October 7th, I said very, very very, very point blank, we have two fights. We have a physical fight, which we're fighting Hamas, and I don't know, maybe Hezbollah or whatever one day. But the fight that is much more important is a battle in the hearts and minds of the worldwide legitimacy, meaning it doesn't matter if the IDF has a gun or a bigger gun than Hamas and a bigger army. I mean, we have 1,000 tanks, they don't even have one. We have 1,000 airplanes, they don't even have one. It's like Mike Tyson fighting an infant, if Mike Tyson has his hands tied, then it'll happen. Then the infant can hit him, and he doesn't have to worry. So even if we have a big army, if we can't use our strength, it doesn't matter. And what's holding us down is the world opinion. And when you understand that, you understand I don't need. The IDF is only 50%. The IDF are the ones that actually do the work. Chas v'shalom, they'll be the ones in military cemeteries. They'll be the ones who will be a burden on their wife because they'll, be legless or blind. Chas v'shalom. I appreciate that. I almost died in the army and almost died in a terror attack. I got hurt. I was injured. I don't say it lightly. But I think that the role that people abroad play is as important, if not even more. Meaning, the IDF, for example, today we're giving Gaza during the war. Okay, I don't know when people are listening to this recording, but now during the war, there are IDF soldiers fighting in Gaza, and at the same time, we're giving them humanitarian aid. I promise you, we're not giving them humanitarian aid because Israel wants to give them. We're giving them because different administrations around the world are pressuring us, and Israel is caving into the pressure. So people abroad can argue with their administration and say, hey, I think there should be an Israel. I think Israel is right. I think Israel should not be giving them humanitarian aid. If they want humanitarian aid, just give back the hostages. Let's add that as a leverage point. If their job is as important, meaning a guy in the IDF can only do whatever his legitimacy is. And in the battle on the hearts and minds, the people in the IDF might fight a battle on the ground, but the battle on the hearts and minds is as important, if not more. In my opinion, it's more, but it's none at least as important.
I actually have to touch on what you said a second ago. Maybe you could tie back in somehow, some way to Yom Hazikaron, but you said you were part of a terror attack at some point. Kind of take me through what happened there. My wife Yali kind of gave me a little bit of an insight, but what was that about?
Wow, it sounds cooler than it. I was guiding in 2017 on Asar Tevet. It came out January 8th. I was guiding a group. It was cadets from officers course, meaning people are learning how to be officers in the IDF. And we drove from Bidi Neuma. They had a lecture given by Avram Enfeld, which if people, listeners are not familiar with, very inspirational speaker, very, very funny, big, old, overweight South African guy who was ridiculously funny and very deep. I think he founded Hillel, I'm pretty sure. Very inspirational figure. Anyway, you can go on YouTube. He has like 1 million skits on YouTube. Not skits, little tidbits. And so they had a speech given by Avram Enfeld, and then we drove to the promenade in Yerushalayim. And just as we were about to start, we had a misunderstanding if our bus had to go pick another group up, and therefore we had to get our bags off, which the soldiers did. And then they said, no, a different bus went. So we were like, okay, load the buses, reload the bags back on the bus. And exactly at that point, I went to Yaeli Kutiel, the only officer I knew, because she was from the officers course in Har Gilo. They're the guys they're in charge of the education week for IDF soldiers. I went to her and I stood next to her and I told her, come on, it's very squishy. So, if it takes 5 minutes to get their bags, it's chaval, it could take 1 minute. Let's try to make it faster. And at that exact point, a girl I knew, she staffed my first birthright, 8 years earlier. Her name was Sarah Kampler. She went to Bar Ilan, studied Middle East studies, then came back to the army. So she was doing the cadet course. So she yelled to me, Eytan. I turned around, and suddenly at that point, the truck rammed right into us. I literally, I saw it happening. Red crane, blue shirt. Literally, this is like a glimpse of a second. And he rammed his truck into us. I went flying. It's on YouTube. You can literally go and see it. I felt like
wait, what do I have to type up in YouTube, or anybody that's listening to us to find it?
What?
What do we have to type into
just
YouTube?
Just type in my name. Just write Eytan Rund. It'll point out somebody later. You can just write Piguad Kira, ramming attack in Armon and Netziv, or my name. It'll probably pop up. And I felt like I went flying a long way. I lost my hat, my sunglasses, my keep on my phone, my bag. I had a backpack on me. Someone flew off of me. I felt like I went flying 30 yards backwards. It was on grass, thank God, because if it was on concrete or pavement, that would be a mess. And in the YouTube film I see, it wasn't 30 meters. It was probably 5 or 6 meters. But it felt like 30. You're rolling over. And I'm going to say something sad, but realistically, a lot of times you hear about these near-death experiences. And people say I saw my whole life running across. I'm sorry, Tamar's my wife. I apologize to my kids. I didn't think about my wife and my kids. I thought, I love my job, and I'm going to be handicapped now because of this silly traffic accident. That's what I thought while I was rolling, because I didn't believe I'm going to be standing. I was like, okay, this is what it hurts to be in a car accident. I was rolling on the grass, and I thought, I'm never going to stand up again. I love my job. My job includes me walking, and I can't believe I'm going to be handicapped for the rest of my life.
Wow.
And then when the truck stopped, I don't know, adrenaline kicks in right away. It's amazing. Like if you were in near car accidents or something, it like literally takes a millisecond. Your whole body gets tense. I was later interviewed about this, like right after it happened. I was like, it took minutes. The whole thing took 28 seconds from start to finish. You can watch it on YouTube. But I thought it was minutes. I had like time to think and process. So I got up and I was like, whoa, I can stand. I didn't have, it was a miracle. I didn't have my phone, everything flew. My bag, my phone, my glasses, my sunglasses, my kippa, everything. I felt I had my gun on me. Like my gun, I was wearing tight jeans, like small on me, and my gun didn't fly. And the truck that rammed into us stopped, and I stood up, and then he tried reversing. Now, when he tried reversing, it suddenly dawned on me that, okay, this is, if you've done a car accident, you get out and you say, oh my God, what have I done? Like, sorry, if you're rammed into a bunch of people, you say, what have I done? You don't try to do reverse to try to rerun over the wounded, which is what he was trying to do. So I stood pretty much right in front of him, and then he drove, like, it's hard for me to explain. I hope I can do it with my hands. He like drove sort of in back, like, so he's facing the wounded and facing me. And then he saw me standing there with a gun right in front of him. So he continued his like circle, and he went in backwards. He drove in reverse, like in circles, pretty much around me. Mm-hmm. I shot one bullet at the back tires. I either missed or that it didn't do anything. Okay, because nothing happened. I thought, okay, I'm going to stop the truck. I have to stop him somehow. So I shot the back tires, and again, I either missed or it didn't do anything. And then that's when I realized, okay, this is not efficient. Then he stopped with his back facing to the wounded and me. And I ran as he suddenly put into reverse to try to reverse onto the wounded. I ran right in back of him. I wasn't even thinking of getting run over. Had I tripped, I'd be sorry. I'd not be here today. But I ran right in back of him towards the cabin of the truck, and I shot my magazine. I had 12 bullets left. I shot them all. I know some bullets I missed because while I was shooting, the window broke. So I definitely, I was sitting right in front of a truck driver that was driving away from me. I couldn't even see him very well. I saw his blue shirt, but because it's hard to explain, but I was coming from west towards, he was in east. So I had the sun, like the glare from the windshield, like in my eyes. Mm-hmm. It was in the winter. It was on a Sarah B'Tevet. And, but I shot everything I had, 12 bullets, and he drove a few meters and he stopped. Yeah, it's sad. Terror attack is not a happy thing. I right away, I went to help the wounded a second later, and there were, I think, 9 or 10 people behind that were not, that their lives were saved. Me and another guy, Yal Cohen, who was next to me, another tour guide, ran at the cabin and shot, and a soldier in between us, I wish I knew his name, a soldier with a black beret. I didn't ask him his name. This took seconds, and we shot, and then he stopped, and then we yelled Chadal, Chadal, which is like the army yelling for stop shooting. There's something dangerous in the shooting range. An animal came in, helicopter flew in front or something. Yelled Chadal, Chadal. So we all yelled Chadal, which means cut it out, stop, and I ran and started helping the wounded. First person I ran to was Dana Ophir. She was a mess, but she was conscious. And then I went to Sarah Kampler, who was a girl I knew. She was also a mess. She dislocated her shoulder. Like the truck literally rammed over her shoulder. And, but she was like mumbling. So she was conscious. And then I went to Herzel, who, later I know was dead, and we tried doing CPR on him. Me and Chaim Neumann, the ambulance driver and a tour guide, he was there also, like guiding one of the groups that already had started. He ran right away, and we tried saving Ella's life unsuccessfully.
So going through that experience for you, and as you said, your life flashed in front of your eyes in the way that, like, oh shoot, I'm not going to be able to do what I love, in the way that I like to, which is being a tour guide and whatnot. After that experience, Baruch Hashem, you're still doing tours today. What did that do for you in terms of whether it's how you gave things over to people? Did that reinvigorate you and make you feel like, wow, I've done this for 14 years already? Like, this is, I'm starting anew. Like, what was that experience like for you in your life in a general sense?
It didn't. It wasn't like an epiphany moment that changed things. It wasn't. It just it re-strengthened a lot of things that I already like see, talk about, feel. People now in Israel were fighting about the, I don't know, reforma mishpatit, haficha mishtarit. I don't know how you translate this to English. Like different judicial reforms in Israel. And before October 7th, everyone was all, very torn, Israeli public. Like I look at it, when I ran to try to help those people, or when I ran to shoot that truck to try to save the lives of the 10 people in back, I didn't ask, what do you believe? What do you feel? What do you think? Do you wear a kippah or not? Like, that's a beautiful thing about Gaza now. Like, that everyone wears helmets all the time when you're in combat, so you don't see what's under the helmet. You have no idea if the guy has a kippah. You can literally serve for 2-3 weeks in the army in combat, whatever. You have no idea if the guys next to you are religious or not. You wouldn't know. Wow. You wouldn't know. It's beautiful, and so that made it like it enforced it for me, like that we're one big. I don't want to say one big fluffy Am Yisrael, but that's what we are. That's you asked me about people from America. I say on the 8th of October, we all felt a punch in the stomach. Even if you live in New Jersey, even if you live in LA, you can live in Florida, on Boca. You felt like you were punched in the stomach. Why did you feel that feeling? You felt that feeling because Am Yisrael, you individually weren't punched in the stomach, but we, Am Yisrael, were punched in the stomach. And that's something that I feel, I felt very strongly then, but I feel it even stronger maybe after that happened. You know what? I didn't, in those few seconds, was it reckless? Was it stupid what I did? Yeah. Do people look at me and say, oh, you're a hero, you saved people's lives? Okay. It made me happy, and I'm very, very thankful to Hashem that He made me able to live the things that I talk about. And I got news for every single person listening. If you were in the same situation, you would do the same thing. Meaning you don't have to be, a guy who all day talks about all these heroic stories to do it. No, I promise you, I'm a scaredy cat. Like, if there would be a little, poodle on the ground, chances are I would probably run away because I'm scared of dogs, or 1,000 different things. I'm not one of those, oh my God, Rambo, whatever. I'm very, very far from it. And if I was able to, I got news for you. 95% of your listeners, like anybody who's not in a wheelchair, would probably do the same exact thing. So it actually annoyed me after that happened that people came over to me and said, oh wow, what you did was heroic. I'm like, no. The only point where I actually felt something heroic, where I had enough chance to think, was right after it happened. The motor was still running, sorry. The terrorist was laid down on his dashboard, and I'll spare the descriptions about blood flowing down from the cabin, whatever. And the motor was still running. And at that point, that was right after ISIS had a lot of attacks and stuff, and Berlin run over was right before or right after. I don't remember, but it was in the height of ISIS, the peak of that time. People were thinking, oh, what if this... Me, and I'm sure every other person there, or at least half, were thinking, if this is a combined attack of a first ramming and then, a car bomb that'll blow up on the rescue teams, we're in trouble. That's the point where I had enough time and to think, okay, do I want to go and help the wounded people? Or do I want to say, fine, my life was spared, I should move away? And I actually, had that second, and I decided I'm going to go help the wounded people, even if it has a price, I mean, after about 10 minutes, okay, a lot of rescue teams came, ambulances came. I mean, they came within, it felt like 30 seconds. It probably took a few minutes. And I was able to move away. And later I got to the hospital. I discovered that one of the people that was killed was Yael, who I was talking to right as soon as it happened. She's in a military cemetery in Kiryat Shaul and Amir. Like, I literally was hit by the corner of the truck, and she was hit by the wheels. I mean, if the truck would have driven, I don't know, 1 foot away, I would not be here today. It's very clear, but it's a feeling that, living in Israel, I always, I don't know if you know, in Har Herzel, there's also a memorial that is a terror victims memorial. Meaning in Har Herzel, we bury the soldiers, and by the way, we have many military cemeteries. And Har Herzel is the biggest, but we have a lot. There's 130. Like, every cemetery in Israel almost has a military section to it. Okay, people don't know that. Har Herzel has about 3,600 graves out of 24,000 people. So a little more than 10% are buried in Har Herzel, but 85% or 80% are buried in other military cemeteries. And but in Har Herzel, they have a big memorial that sometimes people go to. It's not far from the nation's greatest leader section. Like, where Rabin is buried, it's probably 50 yards away. Mm-hmm. And it is the Terror Victims Memorial. We don't bury anybody who was killed in terror attack in Har Herzel, but we commemorate them. Meaning, we say in Israel there's a price to live in this country. The price is not going to be only a military one. It's going to be also a civilian one. Sometimes they're going to go to school and not come back. Sometimes they'll go to a coffee shop and not come back. Sometimes they'll go on a date or a soccer match and just won't come back. And it's a realization. It's a price we pay.
As you described in this crazy event that you went through in your life, the lady that was standing next to you is now buried in Har Herzel, and there are so many cemeteries, as you just said a second ago, across Israel where you have people, whether you're a terror victim, whether you're a soldier, that they are buried there. And throughout your tours, I'm sure you visited a lot of those places. So, specifically because this is, about Yom Hazikaron and connecting to Eretz Yisrael and kind of what we've been through in soldiers and whatnot. What is it that when you go to these places, that if you're like, okay, I have one main, whether it's a message or something like the take home for your groups that you take to those memorials and those places, if they left and you're like, yes, they took home this message, what would that be for you?
Okay. So I have two, not one. I got in a few military cemeteries, obviously, and in every single one, there's always a place where I stop before, and there's always a place where I stop at the end. It's sad that and after October 7th, the place where I sit, and by the way, all tour guides would sit and conclude a tour, was this big patch of grass, Area D, Section 11 in Har Herzel, which just filled up. That patch of grass was taken away from me, and every other tour guide just became full of graves now. But that's where we used to finish every single tour. But what I start before and I start after, and Har Herzel is beautiful, because I don't know, I'm assuming most of our listeners know who Herzel was. In a nutshell, he was George Washington, like in our Israeli George Washington. He imagined that one day we'll have a Jewish state. He wrote letters to the Pope and the Kaiser Wilhelm and the Sultan and whoever he could, and established a Zionist Congress and said, okay, we need to make this happen, not just, okay, sit passively and wait for Jewish temple, fall down from the sky. We have to do something about it. He died 40-something years before Israel was declared, 44 years before. And he's buried in Vienna. And he wrote to his mom, one day the Jewish people will bring my remains to the Jewish state. Okay, this is pre-World War I, there's dukes and princesses fighting dragons in castles around Europe. There's no states in pre-World War I, not too much nationality if you look at it. And so Herzel symbolizes for us the Jewish state, the state, the where to go, the goal. It's on the highest point of the mountain, Har Herzel. You can stand on Herzel's grave and you can roll a ball in every direction. It's on the peak of the mountain. And I always stand in between Herzel and the military section. There's like a big patch of grass. That's where I always start. And I stand and I say, you guys know what's in back of me. and they go military cemetery. I'm like, no, behind the military cemetery, down on the bottom. And they say no, and I'm like, and if I can download an app, I can walk through walls, I can walk through bushes, I can walk through cars, and I can walk through fences. I would get to the cafeteria of Yad Vashem. Yad Vashem, people go to the Holocaust Museum. I'm like, yeah, but not only. Yad Vashem doesn't symbolize to me only, what happened in those 6 dark years in the past. It symbolizes to me a lot more than that. What happens? What potentially might happen to Jewish people if they don't have a Jewish state? Okay, so I say Herzel on top of the mountain is state, and Yad Vashem shows me. Okay, it shows me what happened in Europe in the 40s, but it shows me what happens to Jewish people if they don't have a state. Like a statement everybody hears a lot, and I'm sure half the kids who go to campus or have a Instagram hear this, you have Israel thanks to the Holocaust. Now, that's annoying because it's probably true. We probably would not have worldwide legitimacy, without having, the Holocaust. But it's annoying because it shouldn't be true. Like, my grandfather made Aliyah from Lithuania in 1924, okay? 24, 26 was a machloket there. We don't know if the papers are right or wrong, but in the 20s. This is 20 years or 15 years before the Holocaust, okay? So I felt like I'm worthy of having a country before the Holocaust, even regardless of those. So it's annoying. It's, you have Israel because of the Holocaust. It's annoying because A, it's true, B, it shouldn't be true. The opposite statement is never made. It's not you guys have a Holocaust. It's not you guys have, Israel because, or thanks to the Holocaust. It's you guys had a Holocaust thanks to the fact you didn't have an Israel. Okay, that's the opposite. Like, it's if Israel would be established 1938, not 48, Mr. Diplomat who's visiting Yad Vashem, you wouldn't have to be visiting this place. You wouldn't be visiting Yad Vashem. You'd be visiting a memorial for 200,000 Jews who were kicked out of Berlin. You wouldn't be, in a museum dedicated to, mass murder systematically of millions of people. So Yad Vashem symbolizes what might happen to Jewish people if they don't have a country, and Herzel symbolizes the countryhood, I'll call it, having a country, and in between they put the price. They put the price, and before I start a tour in Herzel, I say don't get sucked into the media, I don't know if agenda is the right word, like the sentiment that they put out, which is, this price is too heavy to pay. It's a price, and the Israeli public is willing to pay it. And looking by what they put is look at the alternative. Look at the alternative, and the alternative is 5 minutes away. It's Yad Vashem, and when I finish a tour, I tell them, listen. By the way, I tell them you're going to go on a tour. There are going to be sad points. There are going to be heroic points. And we're going to talk a lot of different stories. But at the same point, don't forget to look out like a satellite and say, don't reach a level where you say, the price is so high, I'm not willing to pay it. That is a big no-no. Like, that's what somebody might feel if they listen to the media in Israel a lot, the radio too often, or TV too often, is, I'm not willing to pay the price. Again, the Israeli society is willing to pay that price. And a price is a relative term. We're not living in America. We have an ocean here, an Atlantic Ocean here, and a Pacific there. I don't know what. We're living in the Middle East. Pick your choice: Hamas, Hezbollah, or ISIS. 1 hour that way, 5 minutes from Kfar Aza, 10 minutes from Yiron or Duvev, and 20 minutes from Chispin. We're not living in, and we don't have the privilege of having 2 oceans on both sides and having to fly 20 hours to Afghanistan or Vietnam. We don't. Look where from Jabalia to Kfar Aza is about a 10-minute walk. That's if you walk slow. People did on 7th of October, handicapped people did it, and people in crutches. So it's mamish. It's not far. So the Israeli public realizes what might happen if we're not willing to pay that price. And when I finish the tour, I go to a grave of a girl who was killed in a terror attack, not because of something heroic she did. Her name is Shil Hajjaj, but because of her parents. And her parents, they don't deserve it anymore. They're older. I don't know if they're 50 or 60. They're not in the years, and they're not young parents. Or basketball players and gym instructors. They're not. They're just regular Israeli people. He's a driver. She works in a kitchen, and he's a driver. Drives a taxi, a 20 or 15 seater taxi around. They're not wealthy people. They don't have 6 Teslas in their garage. They don't. But you know what they do? They go to every single court assembly, like trial, judging terrorists, and they stand there and they look at the judge and they say, you should give this guy a big punishment that'll be a deterring one, not because of what this guy did, because you want to prevent others from doing the same thing. I have my daughter in Herzel today. There's nothing I can do that can bring my shir back to me, but you can prevent the other father that can be in the same situation that I'm at. And I always finish a tour there, and these guys are the biggest. Write down Herzel Chajaj in Hebrew, you will see 50, or Merav Chajaj, you will see 50,000 references, because they're there in every blocking and demolishing of every house of a terrorist, and they're standing there and they go to the soldiers and they say kol hakavod, and they go to when Hamas terrorists were being treated in Hadassah Hospital. He went to the hospital. He made a whole stink, and he yelled at the crews, "How dare you? Shame on you that you are dealing with a person who, maybe raped or brutally murdered Jews and kids in their car seats and the trucks and the road, and you're treating them. Shame on you." Again, fighting for Israel is not. I always say people have this like understanding, and they say, "Oh, fighting for Israel is in the IDF." I'm like, no, fighting for Israel is not just in the IDF. Yes, you could do it in the IDF. But fighting for Israel could be done in Twitter and in Instagram, and standing up to your professor on campus, and it's in a lot more things. The battle is not just wearing a uniform. Here, Herzel Chajaj did not wear a uniform. Merav Chajaj does not wear a uniform, and they've done incredible things for Am Yisrael. 10 times more than I have done, and when I was in uniform in the army, 10 times more. So that's how that's where I start, and that's where I finish, I would say.
If there's one story that you could tell me, and of course the people listening to this podcast, that was like your take-home story for Yom Hazikaron to just really get the message and the point of what the day is across to people, what would that be?
Wow. There are many. There are many, many, many. But there's one that I feel in particular. On the 7th of October in the morning, there was a guy, a captain in the army. His name was Elana Dean, Seren in Hebrew, and he is a Mefaked Palgan Ser Matkal. That's like a company commander in the Delta Force. I mean, it's very, very prestigious and most elite unit in the army almost. And he was with his wife. They got married in June, I think, Yuval, and they were picnicking, secular. They were picnicking in the Golan on the morning of the 7th of October, and suddenly at 7:30 or 7:40 in the morning, he starts getting phone calls like, "Oh my God, Gewalt broke out," and he said goodbye to Yuval, and he said, "I need to go. I'm sorry, I know it's our time together, but when I gotta go." And he got on the car and he drove, 180 miles an hour the whole way, basically. Grabbed his gun, a few friends, and straight on the 7th of October, they went straight into Re'im, going from house to house, rescuing people. And I think it was the last house they went in the kibbutz, either his gun jammed or as soon as they, broke the door open, a terrorist shot him. And he died in the last house on the kibbutz. And I don't know how many people he saved that day. Yuval was later interviewed, and she said, in that choice between me and her, he chose her. He chose Israel over me. And she said, I'm not offended. That's my realization. He chose her. And I think it was a week after his mom, Galit Ben Moshe, she had the most inspirational interview. A week after they got up from Shiva, Elana Dean is like the Israeli, I don't know, Tucker Carlson, I don't know different names of, she's the Israeli talk show host, Elana Dean. She's all emotion. She looks at you like in a very serious face and phrases everything. Like when you have interviews, you can hear music in the background. She's like that without the music. I mean, she interviewed Galit Ben Moshe, who is a mom who lost her son, almost lost her second son. Her second son was badly wounded, but he wasn't killed. He survived his wounds. And she was interviewed by Elana Dean. Elana Dein asks a bereaved mom, a few days after Shiva, she asked, "How do you feel?" And She goes to her, as a bereaved mom who just got up from Shiva, how do you feel? And Galit ben Moshe it didn't take her 0.1 seconds. Her answer was, proud. And Elana Dean was a little, like, slapped back, with that proud, And she says, wait a minute, you just lost your son like a week and a half ago. Like, proud? She looks at her and says, I almost lost 2 kids. My second son survived his wounds, so he's alive, but he almost died also. He got shot in the neck. And she said, and that's what you feel now? You feel proud? You're not sad about your children? She looks at her and threw a question back again, 0.2 seconds. She said, Yesh lach makom acher lalechet? Do you have another place to go? Tell me. And she didn't know how to answer. That's what I feel. Yom Hazikaron. It's funny, like Yuval. Here, for people who want me to happen, a drop of sadness. Yuval and Ariel ben Moshe, when they were in 10th grade, they were high school sweethearts who later got married, 10 years later. But how'd they meet each other? They were in a school trip. They learned in Haifa, and they were in the military section in Haifa, and not Herzel, different military. And she tripped over like something, and she fell onto his lap, or he did, fell onto her lap, in the military cemetery. And when she was mourning for him, and she literally said, "This is where we met. This is where we met, and this is where I'm saying goodbye here in this military section here, and this is where our relationship began and where our relationship ended." That's definitely what I feel like. Galit ben Moshe, in my opinion, should be lighting a torch on Yom Ha'atzmaut. I mean, what she did to the Israeli public, she made them understand, yes, you could be sad individually. I'm sad individually. Mm-hmm. She was asked by Elana Dean, she said, yeah, I cry when I'm home alone, I cry. But I'm not going to do it here on national TV. I'm not going to do it on national TV. I'm not going to do it on Yom Hazikaron. You're going to meet a strong woman. So that's he didn't have to be there. He chose to do that. He could have stayed picnicking with his wife and gone to the unit and getting stuff ready. The army, everything takes time. He chose to do what he did. He chose to fight the battle he fought, by the way, with thousands of others. Thousands of other people just literally picked up their stuff and drove down south at 1,000,000 miles an hour because they understood what was going on. Yeah.
I kind of want to end off with a question to you that if you had one, call it a message in a bottle, that you gave to every tour group, anybody listening, that's like the take-home message. Keep this with you wherever you go for the rest of your life. What would that message be?
Wow. As opposed to many people you're interviewed in your podcast that are rabbis, I'm not a rabbi. With a lot of different schools, a lot of different rabbis, they connect you to your spiritual and individual growth and Torah. And like what I would say in any program, the tour guide's job or business or niche is to try to connect people not with Torah as much as with Eretz Yisrael or with their collective. I'm very liberal, not in the American left-wing liberal sense, but very liberal about what people want to maybe do with their connection with Eretz Yisrael. But I will say that Eretz Yisrael, I think, is like a mirror. Not your individual stories happened here, but your collective stories happened here. So for every single one of us, looking through Israel is like looking through your great-grandfather's attic. It's like finding his old typewriter and his old diploma from university. And my stories did not happen here individually, but our collective stories did. My grandfather and your grandfather, even if you live in Boston and I live in Tel Aviv, or you live in Atlanta and I live in Yerucham, my grandfather and your grandfather were the same person. And if you can, again, whatever you decide to do vis-a-vis Israel is a very individual decision. But if you look at that and if you look through Israel, you can be reminded. part of what you are, like that you're part of something very, very big, and that's very empowering. If you can manage to connect to that, you suddenly say, "Oh, I'm not just an individual, 18-year-old kid or a 22-year-old soldier or a 16-year-old kid in NCSY Kollel. I'm much greater than that." So even if me in an individual sense, I'm not, and that's something that's always there. And I think that when people come to Israel, they should think. I mean, the parents should, how do you say, encourage their kids not just to ask, how am I going to grow only spiritually or in terms of Torah and learning, but also, again, I'm not saying, but to also have that the term is shikul, to also take that into consideration, be part of the considerations. What's my connection to Eretz Yisrael going to be? And how is that, what do I want? Meaning when I write, let's say on the first day in yeshiva, you write yourself goals. What are your goals from this year? Mm-hmm. That your goals should not be only goals that you could have filled in the same thing had your yeshiva been in Lakewood, New Jersey. Okay? But ask yourself, what is special about coming to a school in Israel? How do I want that to play the fact that I'm learning here, not learning in a yeshiva in Brooklyn?
Wow. First of all, I couldn't agree more. And I think that really gets the point across. And completely aside from everything we've been talking about, I know when you gave tours when I was in Chicago, I ultimately ended up deciding to live in Eretz Yisrael and make Aliyah with my wife. That definitely had an impact. I remember we were on the top of Masada together, and you gave a very, powerful tour. And on the topic of the tours that you give, we were speaking of before we got on here that, you've been given the opportunity to give tours to soldier groups that you do out of the kindness of your time, and sometimes you don't always have the ability to do that, and there is funding that is sometimes needed. So kind of take me, what is going on over there? How can people reach you if they ever want to get a tour with you, and anything related to that?
Wow. Look, I'm very easy to find. I think I'm the only Eytan Rund on Facebook and Instagram.
Is there an email or phone number, by the way, that people can reach you at?
Yeah, my number is 972-546266-896. And my email is Eytan, but I spell my name like an Israeli with a Y, EYTANRUND, at gmail.com. That's also my Facebook name and Instagram name. So it's very, very easy to find me. Look, I got a lot of groups of soldiers and a lot of groups, it's funny because people are all into like donating things to soldiers. I think that soldiers a lot of times are already inside a unit. Mm-hmm. Like it's a little too late. You have to hit them hard when and when you can really impact and influence where they want to go in the army. That's when they're in a mechina, in a gap year program before the army. That's where I guide 20 different SEMs and yeshivas. I guide 35, 40 mechinas every year. That's a very big portion of what I do because I believe in it. I won't lie to you. Half of what I guide is voluntarily because for me it's very important. If not, if I'm lucky, I get paid a third of what I get paid from the average yeshiva or SEM. I feel it's a shlichut. I feel it's important. And you know what? When a kid comes over to me and he comes and says, I got drafted to the paratroopers, or I got drafted to Pasal this or Pasal that, elite units or this and that, or I didn't want to get drafted until I, had a tour with you and you impact, that's worth a lot more for me than money. I mean, you finish a day like that and you don't come and say, oh, I drive a junky Toyota and not a brand new Tesla. I'd rather drive a junky Toyota and have a lot of people coming over and say, wow, you influenced me to make Aliyah when I was in Shiva, or having, kids say, you impacted my life. You're the reason I went to this unit, and you're the reason I became a commander in this and this unit. So that's worth a lot more for me. About your question, like if people want to, a lot of times I have groups like those that ask me, can I volunteer or whatever? And what I tell all these programs is like, yes, but, if somebody else... if I have paying job that day, then I'll have to take a rain check, I'll have to cancel. If people want to, step in and say, hey, I'll sponsor a trip like this. Again, it could be a community or whatever. I'd love that. I mean, I can direct the soldiers at you or the mechinot at you, and then you talk to them. Like,
how can people find you? If somebody's listening to this and is like, you know what, I want to get involved, I want to sponsor these people to go on trips, what's the best way to do that?
Send me a WhatsApp or an Instagram message. I mean, if you tell me, hey, I would like to take this upon me, or I don't know, my community want to sponsor 3 of these, I don't know, fine. So next time it will happen. I promise you. Now, because now it's summer vacation, but all the programs are finishing. But I promise you, in the next year, I will send you a message and direct a, I don't know, 18-year-old girl that'll say, hey, my name's Noah from this and this mechina. We don't have the budget to pay, and we really want Eytan for a tour here and there, and I'll direct them straight to you. Like, I'll be happy to do it. I feel it's important. Like, for example, this week I'm guiding 3 mechinot in ammunition in Herzel. Next week 2. I mean, it's this week 1 on Sunday, 1 day, 4 next week and 4 this week. I think it's important.
I couldn't agree more, and just I know how much you give yourself over, and I know when we were speaking about before you came onto this podcast that like you're a busy person, and I just want to end off with a little bit of a curse to you for taking the time to drive all the way here from Toccoa, and just really thank you so much for taking the time, and God willing we'll have you back again.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for taking the time to do this important.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in to today's Yom Hazikaron special with Eytan Rund. If you guys want to get in contact with Eytan, as we touched on in the last few minutes of the episode, you can see his email and his phone number here on screen. I hope you guys took some chizuk from today's episode, and if you did, feel free to share it with a friend. Give us a like on YouTube, a like on Spotify, and just thank you so much for watching. We'll see you guys in the next episode next week. Looking forward to seeing you soon.